King Henry VII is dead, and his only remaining son, Henry, the Prince of Wales, is proclaimed king. When he comes to the throne at age 17, he immediately marries the Spanish princess, Catherine of Aragon. His new queen, though beloved now, is only the first of many. He is Henry VIII, infamous even half a millennium later for his fabled charm and terrible cruelty, as well as the 6 women he chose to be his queens. Divorced, beheaded and died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. He loved some, hated others. He even executed a few. These 6 remarkable women represented different aspects of Tudor women, yet they were all victims of one tyrant king. These are the 6 queens of Henry VIII.
Catherine of Aragon received one of the best educations available to an infanta, a princess of Spain. She was wily and determined and also courageous, very much like her mother, Isabella of Castile.
Catherine of Aragon was raised her whole life to be queen. She is a Spanish princess and both her parents are monarchs. Her mother is Isabella of Castile and her father is Ferdinand, King of Aragon. So she is incredibly royal.
The Spanish princess was born in the Archbishop's Palace of Alcalá de Henares near Madrid. She was educated in arithmetic, canon and civil law, classical literature, history, philosophy and theology. Under the tuition of Alessandro Gheraldini, who was a clerk in holy orders, she developed a strong devotion to the Roman Catholic faith, a faith that would play a major role in her later life.
Henry VIII in 1509 almost immediately marries Catherine of Aragon, who is his former sister-in-law. She is the widow of his brother, Prince Arthur. Catherine is a Spanish princess and very, very high-born, and a real catch for Henry VII to be able to obtain her for his son, Prince Arthur.
Considered a suitable bride for Arthur, the heir apparent of England, she was betrothed to the prince from infancy. In 1499, she is wed by proxy to Arthur and travels to Ludlow, where he has set up court to meet him a few years later. But the marriage was to be a short-lived one, as not long after the couple are united at Ludlow, both Arthur and Catherine would soon both catch the dreaded sweating sickness. And for the prince, it would be fatal.
So following Arthur's death, she is immediately betrothed to the future Henry VIII. She is 5 years older than him, so she has to wait for him to grow up.
The English king and Spanish monarchs are eager to maintain the alliance that was forged through the marriage of Catherine to the heir apparent of the throne of England. In 1509, Henry VII dies, and the first thing Henry VIII does as king is marry Catherine of Aragon.
When Henry VIII ascended to the throne, one of his first acts was to ask his brother's widow, Catherine of Aragon, for her hand in marriage. This was incredibly expedient. It meant that England could retain a good relationship with Spain. But in order to do so, Henry had to petition the Pope for a license, essentially, a dispensation to marry his dead brother's wife.
The Pope approves this, and Henry and Catherine are married and crowned King and Queen of England, strengthening once again England's alliance with Spain.
Catherine's second marriage was a relatively quiet affair. She was married in a small church outside of the Palace of Greenwich. However, their wedding was followed by an absolutely spectacular coronation, which spanned over several days, including a procession from the Tower of London to Westminster. And I think this is where the public really begin to fall in love with Catherine. She is very well received by the public. They think an awful lot of her very gracious performance. And the coronation is followed by great banquets and feasts.
When she marries Henry VIII, after several years of waiting, she must have felt that all her prayers have been answered. He is incredibly good looking, and undoubtedly Catherine fell deeply in love with Henry. And he seems to have believed himself to be in love with her. She was young, she was attractive, she had sort of golden reddish hair. She was also very, very highborn and knew exactly how to behave as queen. Catherine rarely puts a foot wrong as queen consort.
Catherine proves herself to be a good wife and a great queen. Henry adores her, and the country follows suit.
Whilst Henry was away on a campaign in France, he actually appointed Catherine of Aragon as his regent, so she was ruling the kingdom in his stead. But James IV of Scotland took this opportunity to invade England. He obviously saw Catherine acting as a regent was an opportune time to invade and take advantage of the king's absence. Now, many a queen would have simply fled to the Tower of London and allowed her nobles to take care of the invading army on her behalf. But instead, Catherine ordered that the Tower of London was emptied of all its armoury and armour, and she accompanied the troops, even though she was pregnant at the time, and actually addressed the troops to bolster support for England. And it was at the bloody Battle of Flodden that James IV of Scotland was slain and Catherine of Aragon was triumphant on this occasion. She actually sent Henry a piece of James IV's surcoat, which was bloodied up, so that Henry could wear it on a banner during his campaign in France. Indeed, in a letter to Henry, she actually confesses that she wanted to send James's body to Henry as a trophy, but she conceded that the English nobles would not stomach it.
She fulfills all her duties as queen, save one, securing a male heir.
Catherine in many ways was an ideal queen consort. She was supportive of Henry and his many campaigns abroad, but she was also happy to be subservient to him. She knew that one of her chief responsibilities was to secure the succession, and she was certainly happy to be supportive of Henry in every aspect of his duties.
The couple have several children. Catherine falls pregnant soon after her marriage, but unfortunately, only one daughter, Mary, who's born in 1516, survives. Catherine gives birth to probably 3 sons, but only one survives birth, only to die after a few weeks. Mary is her only surviving child, and while for Catherine, as the daughter of a female sovereign, the idea of a reigning queen is not so alien. For Henry, coming out of the Wars of the Roses, it is a terrifying prospect.
Like many kings before him, Henry VIII took mistresses, but there was one mistress, Elizabeth Blount, or Bessie Blount, with whom Henry VIII most certainly fathered an illegitimate child, who was Henry Fitzroy, born in 1519. Henry actually elevated Henry Fitzroy to the position of the Duke of Richmond, which was a title that came from his family, and this must have been hugely humiliating for Queen Catherine.
With Catherine 6 years older than Henry and nearing middle age, the king begins to worry. With only one daughter and no legitimate sons, the succession of the Tudor dynasty is not yet assured.
Catherine of Aragon had her last pregnancy in 1518, and after the birth of an illegitimate child in 1519, I think the seeds were being sown in Henry's mind that the issue with begetting an heir wasn't his, that the fault, if you want to put it like that, may lay with Catherine. Catherine, of course, was 6 years older than Henry, and I think Henry was looking at the clock and thinking that time was running out for them.
All too aware of his own mortality as well as the precarity of the Tudor succession without a son and heir, Henry begins to panic. He must sire a legitimate son. He sets his sights on a young and fertile woman, one of his wife's ladies-in-waiting. Her name is Anne Boleyn.
Henry VIII was actually quite slow in his advances towards Anne Boleyn, who joined his court in 1522. He actually had a relationship with Anne's sister, Mary Boleyn, in the interim years before he turned his attentions towards her. But we know for certain by 1526 that Henry VIII was falling head over heels in love for Anne Boleyn. She favoured the French fashions, but also she was highly intelligent. She had been afforded an education that was quite different to the women around her in England. And she also had very radical religious ideas too.
There is no doubt that Henry adored Anne. He loved her deeply. In his letters, he talks about being struck by the dart of love. We are still looking at the Henry VIII who is young and good looking. He's in his 30s, he's still in his prime, he's only starting to gain weight, still a real catch. So it's easy to see how Anne could fall in love with a man like Henry VIII.
Henry VIII bombarded Anne with a number of love letters. Unfortunately, none of Anne's replies survive, so we can only read from Henry's letters what those replies may have been, or certainly what Henry interpreted them to have been. We know that Anne at times doesn't reply to Henry's letters, and he writes afterwards to admonish her for not replying. And if I'm honest, these are the works of a lovesick schoolboy. He talks about his enduring love for her. He sends her dead bodies of deer that he has hunted for her in the hope that when she eats the flesh, she will be reminded of him.
Anne Boleyn grew up at Hever Castle in Kent, the youngest daughter of Thomas Boleyn, who would later become Earl of Wiltshire and Earl of Ormond, and his wife, Lady Elizabeth Howard. At court in France, she was exposed to culture, dance, etiquette, literature, music and poetry, and gained experience in flirtation and courtly love.
Certainly she has the upper hand and she is more dominant, and we know there are occasions at court where they argue. For example, once she says that she's wasted her youth on him and threatens to leave him before he bursts into tears. So she is definitely the dominant party before they marry. But there is no doubt, at least on Henry's part, that it is true and deep love, and almost certainly the deepest love that he felt throughout his lifetime. Anne Boleyn had always looked for a good marriage, because marriage is a way towards social status for women. We know this from her relationship with Henry Percy, the heir to the Earl of Northumberland. She was definitely trying to find a good husband. She was not prepared to throw herself away as a mistress to the king. And part of the reason for this may well be that she has seen firsthand what happens to the king's cast-off mistresses, because her sister Mary Boleyn had been the king's most recent mistress. She was the king's lover for several years, may or may not have borne him children, and when the relationship ends and Henry tires of her, he simply discarded her. Mary Boleyn got very, very little from her relationship to Henry VIII. So Anne is well aware that Henry will tire of her, and she then will be devalued on the marriage market.
So she really rebuffed Henry's advances until she got to the point where Henry offered her a legitimate path, a hand in marriage and a crown. The only real way that Henry was going to be able to marry Anne was if the Pope would annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. And Anne and Henry knew that the best mechanism for achieving that end would be through the King's minister, Thomas Wolsey.
At Henry's behest, Cardinal Wolsey travels to Rome, where he will petition Pope Clement to grant the annulment of the king's marriage to the Queen, on the grounds that it was, and had always, been illegitimate.
Henry wanted to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon on the basis that she had been his brother's wife. So they're related to within the first degree of affinity. They are, as far as the church is concerned, brother and sister. And his argument is that you cannot dispense such a marriage.
The Cardinal appeals to Pope Clement for an annulment of Henry and Catherine's marriage on the basis that the initial dispensation was void, as the marriage clearly disobeyed instructions in the book of Leviticus, which states that the marriage of a brother's wife was incestuous and would bear no children.
Such a marriage cannot be permitted. It is against church law. What is quite ironic is that when he first sends to the Pope to request his annulment, his messenger also has a second request for a dispensation to allow him to marry a woman within the first degree of affinity to him. And this is because his sexual relationship with Mary Boleyn has created the same relationship between him and Anne that exists between him and Catherine of Aragon. So it's an ironic point, but I think it also demonstrates very, very clearly that his reasons for annulling the marriage to Catherine were not sincere. and that actually he wanted rid of her because he wanted to marry Anne Boleyn.
This became a matter of international tension. Catherine's nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, is vehemently against the annulment, as is Queen Catherine herself. Pressure comes from all sides for Pope Clement, as Queen Catherine and King Charles V urge him not to annul the marriage, and Wolsey and Henry push for the dispensation to be made.
While the Pope is in the Emperor's power, he will never grant the annulment of the Emperor's aunt's marriage. The English try and Cardinal Wolsey tries, but he's in an impossible situation. He can never do it. He will never be able to annul this marriage.
Caught between the wills of two powerful kings, the Pope delays his decision as long as possible, the indecision infuriating both Henry and Anne, who begin to doubt Wolsey's loyalty to the crown over the church. Wolsey returns to England without the Pope's annulment.
Wolsey ultimately fails to secure an annulment for Henry from his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, and this leads to his dramatic fall.
Enraged by Wolsey's failure to secure the annulment, Henry turns to more drastic measures. Wolsey is arrested and sentenced to death. Thomas Cromwell, one of Henry's key ministers at court, proposes a new plan to grant Henry's divorce: reformation.
Henry knows that the Pope is not going to grant his annulment to his first queen, Catherine of Aragon.
There is no solution other than breaking away from the Pope, because if the Pope will not grant the annulment, then perhaps the Church needs to move from the Pope.
And therefore he is greatly influenced by these new thinkers, including Anne Boleyn, and taking the unprecedented step to break with the Church of Rome and to install himself as king, as the head of his new church.
As soon as Thomas Cranmer is confirmed as Archbishop of Canterbury, he disavows his oath of allegiance to the Pope and declares the English Church separate from Rome, with the king as its supreme head. And this is the moment that the English Church goes its own way.
In order to do this, Henry actually elevates himself beyond kingship and proclaims that he is an emperor of his own empire. This is really the beginnings of the British Empire. This is where it all begins.
Anne and Cromwell's shared reformist views make them indomitable allies, and so begins the break from Rome, fueled more by political affair than theological dispute. Catherine is given the title the Dowager Princess. Such was Catherine's impression on people that even her enemy Thomas Cromwell said of her, if not for her sex, she could have defied all the heroes of history. Having installed himself as the supreme head of this new church in England, Henry grants his own divorce and begins preparations to marry Anne Boleyn. In the winter of 1532, Anne and Henry journey to Calais to gain the approval of King Francis I of France. In a private conference with Anne, he gives them his blessing, and by the time they reach Dover on their ship, they are lovers. They wed hurriedly in secret and again publicly 2 months later.
Now that Henry and Anne were married, Henry intended to present Anne to his country as his legitimate second queen. So he affords her an almost more lavish coronation than his own.
Anne is crowned with St. Edward's crown, which is traditionally only used for the coronation of a sovereign and not a queen consort.
And it is thought that Henry was actually crowning the child in Anne's belly at the time.
A few short months later, the child is born. The palace is rejoicing, singing the praises of the new queen.
Henry had moved heaven and earth to marry Anne Boleyn, and the price for crowning her was the delivery of the much longed for male heir that Henry so desired. But the child that Anne had in 1533 wasn't a son.
Heartbreakingly for Henry, it is another girl. They call her Elizabeth. The couple's marriage is not too affected. The delivery of a healthy baby girl is celebrated and a good sign for the conception of future sons. Following a stillbirth as early as Christmas 1534, the couple were at odds, and Henry went as far as discussing with Cranmer and Cromwell the possibility of divorcing her without having to return to Catherine. But the couple reconciles, and Anne is pregnant by Henry again in 1536. But that February, Henry enters into a jousting tournament.
Henry VIII loved jousting, and it is an incredibly dangerous sport. Once in his youth, actually, he came close to being killed when he forgot to put the visor down on his helmet, and his friend, the Duke of Suffolk, didn't notice and jousted at him, and actually the lance splintered, and he was very lucky to survive.
In 1536, Henry suffered a disastrous accident whilst jousting. Some reports state that he was unconscious, whilst others just mention the fact that he was severely injured.
He fell badly and his horse landed on top of him.
This really changed Henry's lifestyle. It, in many ways, emasculated him.
One account suggests that he was unconscious for several hours, and there are also suggestions that perhaps there is some sort of brain damage.
I think this is a turning point in Henry's life, and not for the better.
The shock of the accident leads the pregnant queen to tragically miscarry the son she had been bearing.
Anne Boleyn would blame her final miscarriage on the news of the king's accident. And it really hammered home to the king and to his court. He still did not have a legitimate male heir.
The trauma of Henry's injury and Anne's miscarriage has put the couple at odds, and Anne's failure to provide Henry with a male heir coincided with Henry's infatuation with Jane Seymour, one of Anne's maids of honour.
And I think this is the beginning of the end of Anne's life.
Henry told Anne that he could see that he would have no more boys by her, which was particularly ominous. Henry, by this stage, was involved with Anne's lady-in-waiting, Jane Seymour, who had herself declared that she would not become the king's mistress.
Thomas Cromwell and Anne, who once had been united in the pursuit of the same cause, are now warring over the king's favour.
Whilst Henry and Cromwell were intent on plundering the spoils from the monasteries and funneling the funds into their coffers, Anne had other ideas. She believed that the wealth from the monasteries should be distributed, much as the monasteries had done, to the common people by way of establishing educational facilities for the masses. The masses had relied upon the monasteries for education. So this set Cromwell and Anne against each other, and Anne actually threatened Cromwell at this point with his head. Cromwell retreated from court, and upon hearing that the king wanted out of the marriage, he returned and fired directly at Anne's head.
This was Cromwell's cue to strike. Cromwell poisons Henry against her, and she is arrested and charged with adultery, incest, and treason.
In truth, there was absolutely no foundation for any of the charges held against Anne. The simple fact of the matter is that Henry wanted out. and he knew that Anne would not go quietly. Moreover, he knew that Anne wasn't protected like Catherine was by a foreign power, and therefore she was much more easily dispatched than Catherine. On the 19th of May, Anne was led from her apartments at the Tower of London at 8 a.m. to a scaffold that had been erected on Tower Green. Everything that was to happen to Anne on that day had been carefully planned by her husband, Henry. She was led through a crowd of perhaps 2,000 people to the scaffold, which was draped in black. And as she mounted the scaffold steps, it was noted by observers that she looked calm, and some even said that she had never looked so beautiful. She then turned and addressed the crowd and gave what was really an archetypal scaffold speech. There were set elements to such speeches, such as praising the king and also asking the crowd to pray for her. But what Anne doesn't do in this moment is admit her guilt. This was expected of someone at the point of death, but Anne defiantly stated that while she recognised that she had been found guilty according to the law, she would speak nothing against it. She paid the executioner the sum of £23, 6 shillings and 8 pence, which was roughly 2 years' wages for a skilled labourer. Anne then knelt into the straw, and one of her ladies blindfolded her, and she prayed, "To God I commend my soul, Lord Jesus, commend my soul." The executioner then grasped the sword from beneath the straw, but called to his assistant for his sword, and then looked blindly to the moving assistant as the executioner swung the sword and severed her head from her body.
Henry arranges that a cannon be fired at the moment of Anne's death so that he knows it is done. This is Henry's cue to move on, as the following day he proposes to Jane Seymour. 2 weeks later, they are married.
Compared to Henry's first 2 queens, Jane Seymour was rather less complicated. She was rather meek and slightly milder than Catherine and Anne, and was certainly happy to be more pliant to Henry's will.
Jane, the daughter of Sir John Seymour and Marjorie Wentworth, was most likely born at Wolf Hall, Wiltshire. As Queen, Jane was graceful yet strict and formal. She replaced the lavish entertainments and extravagance of Queen Anne's household with strict decorum.
It is a marriage that he hopes will bear sons. Jane comes from a very fertile family. She has many brothers, and he's hopeful that Jane will prove a very different wife to Anne Boleyn. It actually takes Jane a really long time to fall pregnant, and there are signs that not all is right in the marriage. In the autumn of 1536, for example, Henry very publicly reminds Jane Seymour of Anne Boleyn's fate and tells her not to meddle in politics. Her coronation keeps being postponed, which must have caused anxiety for the new queen, because of course she knows what has happened to Anne Boleyn. She knows her predecessor has been beheaded. Finally, at the start of 1537, Jane realises she's pregnant, and When she feels the baby quicken, so she feels the baby move, the whole country erupts into celebration. Henry is incredibly solicitous throughout her pregnancy. He vows to remain close to her so she's not frightened by any rumours. This is probably a reference to Anne Boleyn's final miscarriage and the fact that she blamed it from Henry's fall from a horse.
After many years of heartache, Jane Seymour finally gave Henry the son and heir that he so desperately craved.
When Jane goes into labour in October 1537, the whole country hold their breath. And it's a very long, very arduous labour. Finally, after 2 days, Jane gives birth and it is a healthy prince and everybody celebrates.
Henry was elated. There was much celebration throughout the kingdom and lavish feasts and jousts were prepared.
This is the moment that Henry has been waiting for nearly 30 years. And everything seems all right with Jane. She seems to be recovering well. She's able to send out the official birth announcement shortly after the birth. However, the day after the christening, it's realised that she has a fever and she is suffering from childbed fever.
But tragically, all was not well in the birthing chamber.
Childbirth is a very, very common form of death for women in the period, and Jane holds on until the 24th of October, 12 days after the birth of her son, before sadly dying in the night.
Henry VIII was absolutely crestfallen at the death of Jane Seymour. He really appears to have entered into a prolonged period of mourning and depression. Henry at this point had gone through a huge amount of heartache. He had gone to extraordinary lengths to secure this son and heir. And then, tragically, his wife had been snatched away from him. He really must have felt that everything was stacked against him at this point.
Heartbroken without his third queen, Henry falls into a deep depression. It will be 2 years before he marries again.
Henry was devastated by Jane's death. Usually when his wife died, often because he caused the death himself, he had another candidate lined up for wife. But with Jane, it came as a complete shock. It came at the moment that he was happiest. She had given him a son. From the moment of her death, she undoubtedly became his most beloved wife. She is the wife that he chose to be buried with. She is the wife who people prayed for her soul at court and in churches. He insisted that she was memorialised. She appears in paintings of the Tudor dynasty commissioned after her death. She was always his favourite wife, and it's really because she gave him his son, even at the cost of her own life. He secluded himself away at Esher Palace for a time and does seem to have sincerely mourned her. However, of course, he only had one son, and he knows from experience, he knows from his own brother Arthur, that one son is not enough for a king. And so almost immediately measures are put in place to try and find the king a new bride.
Cromwell, one of the king's closest advisors, visits the king. He has a proposal. He explains that Henry should marry Anne of Cleves in a diplomatic move that would ensure a good relationship with a powerful duchy in the Holy Roman Empire.
So most kings in the period chose their wives for diplomatic reasons. They wanted to make a grand foreign alliance which would bring friendship between the countries. Henry had been unsuccessful in finding a French bride and then an imperial bride.
Rather like Anne Boleyn, Thomas Cromwell was something of a religious radical, and he understood that Henry's kingdom was rather less secure than it should be because of his newly founded Church of England. Therefore, Cromwell's proposal was to create an alliance with a Protestant country, and he looked abroad to Cleves.
Intrigued by the proposition, Henry dispatches his favourite court painter, Hans Holbein the Younger, to take her likeness. Months later, the painter returns with a portrait of a young and healthy woman. Henry agrees to the union.
The marriage contract was signed in September 1539, and Anne then made her way towards England.
Henry VIII's first meeting with Anne of Cleves couldn't have gone worse. Anne was supposed to voyage to court to meet Henry, but like a lovesick boy, Henry can't wait to meet her and decides to visit her in disguise.
Henry VIII arrived to find Anne of Cleves looking out of a window at a bear baiting below.
Now, as part of court etiquette and as part of the language of courtly love, Henry's courtiers knew that Henry would often appear in disguise, and they in turn were supposed to recognise the king no matter what he was wearing. This was to flatter the king. Now, Anne grew up in a completely different environment to this. She wasn't conversant in the language of courtly love at all. And when Henry VIII burst into her chamber, she was completely unimpressed with this man that stood before her.
Her visitor then left the room and returned wearing a purple cloak, which was a cue for everyone to recognise the king. As they fell to their knees, Anne, of course, realised her mistake and recognised that this was Henry VIII, this was her suitor. But the damage had already been done.
And I think actually in that moment, Henry VIII saw, perhaps for the first time in his life, a genuine reaction to how unattractive he had become. Anne hadn't recognised him as this all-powerful, majestic person. She'd simply seen an obese and slightly ageing man before her. Henry would leave that chamber and proclaim, "I like her not," and state that she was nothing like as was depicted in her painting.
Actually, most people seem to have agreed that the portrait was a good likeness, but there was just something about Anne that didn't appeal to Henry.
But I think the truth of the matter was that there was an ugly, ageing and smelly person in that chamber, and it wasn't Anne of Cleves, it was Henry.
Unable to get out of the marriage for fear of offending Europe, the couple marries. Anne is 24 years to Henry's 48 when they are married.
From that moment onwards, Henry was desperate to find a way out of the marriage, but it was impossible. And he'd already offended the King of France and the Holy Roman Emperor. He couldn't risk offending the Duke of Cleves and the Schmalkaldic League as well. So he had to go through with the wedding. He had to put his neck in the yoke, as he said on his wedding day. He and Anne married, and he attempted to make the best of the situation. They tried to consummate the marriage. But Henry, again, his mind was closed to Anne. He just couldn't do it. He had suffered from intermittent impotency since the days of his marriage to Anne Boleyn and just could not consummate the marriage. So the marriage was a disaster. It was unconsummated. Finally, when the political situation changed about 6 months later, and it was no longer desirable to be allied to Cleves, Henry sent Anne to Richmond, ostensibly because there was plague in London. He wanted to keep her safe. However, it was noted that Henry, who was normally so frightened of disease, remained himself in London. In the middle of the night, Henry sent his commissioners to Anne to inform her that he had doubts about the legality of their marriage, and would she consent to try the validity of the marriage in court. Anne had obviously been roused from her bed from this, so it was intentionally frightening. She could barely speak English, she still needed an interpreter. She was very, very frightened by the commissioners. To the ambassador from Cleves, she actually mentioned the fate of Anne Boleyn, so she knew very well what had happened to Henry's previous wives. In her fear, she consented that the marriage be tried, and predictably, of course, it was annulled.
In the coming years, Anne and Henry awarded the honourable title the King's beloved sister, and enjoys many invitations to court out of gratitude for her not contesting the annulment. So much is Henry's fondness for her, the King decrees that she would be given precedence over all women in England, save his own wife and daughters. She is a great influence on Henry's daughter Elizabeth, and lives a long and happy life after the annulment. She outlives Henry by 5 years, and in her will mentions his daughter Elizabeth, who within a year would become queen. Henry is now 49 years old and once more without a queen.
Having served Henry loyally for many years, Thomas Cromwell was now seen by the king as the architect of this incredibly awkward marriage between Anne of Cleves and himself, and he really blamed Cromwell.
The Duke of Norfolk, a noble of conservative views and an old rival of the reformist Cromwell, has another marriage proposal for the king. He offers Henry the hand of his young niece, Catherine Howard, and convinces him that Cromwell no longer prioritises the king's wishes, but his own. This is Cromwell's demise. On the 28th of July 1540, Cromwell is led to the scaffold at Tower Hill, where the executioner's axe awaits him. Not far away, on the very same day, King Henry and his fifth queen, Catherine Howard, dance and feast at their wedding banquet.
Catherine Howard is really Henry VIII's midlife crisis. She'd been a lady-in-waiting to Anne of Cleves. She's a teenager.
Henry VIII is absolutely besotted by Catherine. He lavishes gifts upon her, jewellery and clothes.
But Catherine keeps secrets.
Soon rumours start at court that all is not well with Catherine's past.
She was a woman with a past, or a girl with a past really. She'd had 2 previous lovers, one of which had been consummated.
Catherine is no more than a teenager when she marries the 50-year-old Henry. Pushed into his bed to assure her uncle's influence over the king, she was little more than a pawn in a game she was too young to understand. Decades younger than the aging king, Catherine is more interested in the other men at court than her own husband.
And the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, leaves a letter for the king to find, which details some troubling facts about Catherine's past. At first, Henry VIII is entirely dismissive of these claims, but he does order that Thomas Cranmer investigate. But then things take a turn for the worse. A letter is discovered in the possession of Thomas Culpeper, one of Henry VIII's favourites at court. This is a romantic letter. It talks of Catherine longing to see him, and this sends Henry into an absolute rage. He is blinded by this rage and suggests that he is going to kill Catherine with his own sword. She is confined to her apartments and then is imprisoned at Sion Abbey. But rather unlike Anne, who is dispatched within 19 days of her arrest, Catherine languishes in prison. Henry can't quite believe what has happened.
She did not heed the warnings of her predecessors. Catherine is arrested. Catherine is charged with adultery and treason and is beheaded on Tower Hill.
Henry VIII's sixth and final queen was Catherine Parr. Catherine was a relatively young woman when Henry first took notice of her, but actually she had already been twice widowed.
She was very, very reluctant to marry Henry and actually seems to have been quite horrified when he declared his interest in her. Henry, however, would not be refused. There are claims that Catherine actually said it was better to be his mistress than his wife, but if that was the case, he ignored her and insisted on marriage.
I think at this point in his life, Henry is looking for peace and stability and looks to Catherine Parr to rehabilitate his family life, to bring his children together and to bring harmony once more to the royal family.
Catherine Parr is a woman of sharp intelligence and strong faith.
Catherine Parr is an incredibly intelligent woman. She is very well read and has very radical religious ideas too. She's also the first queen to ever publish a book and the first woman to publish a book in England under her own name and in English.
Catherine is incredibly fond of the king's daughters, Mary and Elizabeth. His sixth queen is instrumental in convincing Henry to pass the Third Succession Act in 1543 that restored his daughters Mary and Elizabeth to the line of succession. The new queen is a devout Protestant. She is keenly aware of the fate of her predecessors, and Henry does not hesitate to remind his new queen. Both her queenship and life are threatened due to her radical Protestant beliefs.
Catherine immediately took up her duties as queen. She seems to have felt that her queenship was ordained by God, and certainly later in a letter she wrote that God had withstood her will when she had not wanted to become, that God had required her to take on the queenship. And she seems to have felt that this was to help promote Protestantism, because Catherine is England's first Protestant queen. She was very involved in Protestant circles at court. She was involved with Anne Askew, who was an outspoken and very prominent Protestant. But of course, to be a Protestant in Henry VIII's England was to be a heretic and to be subject to prosecution by the church courts and possibly burning, which was a penalty for heresy. So the stakes were very, very high. Catherine continued in her attempts to try to convert Henry to Protestantism. And there's this great story from John Fox, the famous Martyrologist, where Catherine would go to Henry while he was ill in bed and try and debate with him, try and persuade him to become a Protestant. One night, after she had gone, Henry complained about the fact that his wife was trying to teach him religion. And this allowed the conservative Bishop of Winchester, Stephen Gardiner, to jump in and sort of imply that perhaps Catherine was guilty of heresy. And an arrest warrant was drawn up. It's a really strange story, and I think we can't take it at face value, because the arrest warrant is dropped outside Catherine's chambers and taken to her. And she, of course, becomes hysterical when she sees this warrant. Henry then hears her crying and sends for his doctor, who he's actually already told all the details of the plot. And he says to the doctor, please go and see what is wrong with my wife. The doctor then goes to Catherine and tells her exactly what Henry has told him. And so Catherine then goes to Henry and is tested by Henry. He says to her, oh, Catherine, can you clear up this point of religion that I was uncertain on? And Catherine really lays it on thick. So she says, I couldn't possibly instruct you. Wives are here to learn from their husbands. I only engage in religious debates with you because I want to learn from your wisdom. And Henry is pacified and says, we are friends again, and the matter is resolved.
Catherine manages to do what many of his wives have failed to: gain access to Henry and plead for their lives.
So, I think there are too many coincidences in that story to take it at face value, and I don't think Henry had a seventh wife lined up. So what he is trying to do is he is trying to scare Catherine back into submission. But certainly the relationship is not quite the same. And for the rest of 1546, Catherine is in quite a precarious position, aware that there are rumours that Henry may take a seventh wife.
The couple reconcile, but their relationship is precarious for the rest of the king's life.
And she's excluded from his deathbed. She's not able to be with him on his orders when he dies, which I think again shows that their relationship is on shaky ground.
On 28th of January 1547, Henry dies at age 55 at the Palace of Whitehall. His death is kept secret for 3 days. His son, Edward, is little more than 9 years old and is now the King of England. Catherine Parr is given the title the Dowager Queen and marries a fourth and final time, only to die a few years later in childbirth. Divorced, beheaded and died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. Life as a Tudor woman was difficult at the best of times, but when you're married to a tyrant king, it can be so much worse. Your every move scrutinized for treason. Your every motive is questioned. Treated as little more than a brood mare or a lamb to the slaughter. These 6 fascinating women were deserving of so much more than the lives and deaths their husband granted them. These are the women that called King Henry VIII their husband. Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, Catherine Parr. Some are painted as villains, some victors, others victims. But they were all Tudor queens.